Digital music. Friends. Digital music. Friends. Digital music. Friends. Digital music.
Hello everyone and welcome to Digital Music Trends episode 113, recorded on the 12th of December 2012. And today is going to be a very Spotify-centric episode with the announcements of last week. But first of all, let me introduce you to the guests for this week, which are next to me, Darren Hemmings from Motive Unknown Digital Music Consultancy. Hi Darren, how's it going?
Good. This is quite strange being sat next to you. It feels a bit real.
Yeah, it's a first for the show actually. And then we have Eliot Van Buskirk, who's editor-in-chief at the Econest and runs Evolver.fm, the site. So hi Eliot, and thanks for joining us once again. How's it going?
Thanks. Going quite well. Thank you very much.
That's great. And we have Steve Knopper, who's a writer for the Rolling Stone and Wall Street Journal and all sorts of other publications, and also author of a series of books, including most relevant for today's conversation, Appetite for Self-Destruction. So hi Steve, and thanks for coming on the show once again. How's it going?
Good, thanks. Thanks for having me, guys.
That's great. Well, let's kick it off right away. I think I wanted to start by talking about the Spotify story. If any of the listeners haven't heard about this yet, last week there was an announcement by Spotify, a big event where they announced some of the latest numbers for the service, and they also announced some of the new features that are coming up for the service in the next few months, that are gonna change the experience for users and make it better, hopefully. But I wanted to start with the numbers. So the latest figures that were announced by Daniel Ek at the event, where the service now has 20 million active users, 5 million paid subscribers, and it has paid out around $500 million to artists, to record labels mostly, and by proxies to artists a little bit. So it also has talked about 1 billion playlists that are currently on the service, which is a huge number of playlists that now they want to capitalize on that and create a better experience for users. So let's talk about the numbers first of all. We always talk about how we are in a bubble, and we don't think that the services have quite come mainstream yet. But 20 million users across the territories that they're present in, I think it's 17?
I think it's now, yeah.
Yeah, 17 territories. Is actually a fairly good number. So when do you think we're going to stop talking about the fact that streaming is not mainstream? Steve?
Who wants to go first?
I could start.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I think that mainstream is such a broad word. I mean, economically, I think one thing that the record labels have talked about streaming services, their context for many years has been, eventually this is going to save the industry. We heard Rick Rubin say this, 4 or 5 years ago in the New York Times Magazine, and many others have said, and whenever I interview people at record labels, they're always saying, just around the corner, streaming services are going to be the thing that take us back to the heights that we used to have, or at least, a big part of that. And so I think that, business-wise, there are labels that at least have these, I don't want to say illusions because that's too negative, but I really don't think it's necessarily going to be that big. But I think when it does get to that point, when people are saying, oh, I won't buy music anymore, I will instead have Spotify or listen to only Pandora or something like that, that's when it becomes everybody does it, it's mainstream.
Yeah. Eliot?
Sure. I would agree with everything Steve just said. And I guess for me, it seems like most of the people that I talk to, generally speaking, have sort of already moved towards a streaming world, and yet there's an absence of collecting the way we used to collect. And I think that was a big part of the Spotify announcement, was going from this idea of sort of haphazardly, putting this huge list of playlists together. I mean, I don't know if you guys use Spotify or what the left nav bar looks like for you, but for me, it's a total disaster.
Yeah.
And I can't find anything. Half of the playlists I have there are just albums, because the playlist was considered, by Daniel Ek to be sort of the molecule, I guess, the song would be an atom, but the building block of Spotify. I think he called it the lifeblood of Spotify last week. And so this move towards a collection, I think, will add something that's been missing to that part of the streaming world, which is it's the biggest part, which is that sense that you really do own a collection. And I think it'll make Spotify a stickier service. I think it'll facilitate the movement into the mainstream, because a lot of us have a sort of queasy feeling right now, I think, where even the music that we have on CDs or the MP3s that we have, we don't really have those all put together anywhere anymore. And it's something that Rdio has been doing really well. And Spotify is sort of playing catch up in that regard. So I think that's a big part of it, is creating more of the illusion of ownership. This offline playback feature is a part of that, where you don't have to be streaming. You can actually carry the stuff on your device. That and the collections. And then the third thing that I think will mainstream it is just time. Behaviors, people attach themselves to certain behaviors, then they get old, and then that's the mainstream. I mean, it's kind of just a simple matter of time. Look at what somebody who's 15 or 25 years old is doing, and add however many years you want, and there you go. So I think it's the big race is, can Spotify and these other services, I hate this expression, but can they offer a good enough value proposition, or can they do a big enough value add from free to paid, so that when this does go mainstream, it turns into the $120 a year proposition and not the $0 to $5 that you get from ad-supported stuff. Yeah. So that seems to be the big trade-off right now. And the great thing about writing about digital music is you can always say, like, well, this is going to happen, and we've been saying it for, I don't know, I've been saying this stuff for like 15 years, but, Rome wasn't built in a day. And if you look at what we've already been through, it's actually a lot of ground that we've covered. It just seems like slow as molasses as it happens, but I believe we're getting there.
Absolutely. Darren?
I think for me, it's been kind of interesting, because there's been obviously a few things going on lately where people do end-of-year roundups, and we were both at a Music Ally thing last night where they were kind of looking to next year and asking a lot of these kinds of questions. And there are some interesting points made. One of them is that obviously in this world that the four of us occupy, clearly we're constantly focused on these services. But as you go out and stop average man in street in small town of country of choice, they may not even have heard of Spotify, much less used it or anything else. And, and I think I've said on here before, that if you look at the British music chart, certainly the UK one, the average physical digital split in the chart for albums certainly is kind of, 65-70% sales are CDs still. So, there's still quite some distance there. Another point that I'd love to take credit for but can't, that was again made yesterday, was that, there is this thing that we're seeing now, with the artist I work with, in the run up to Christmas, your digital shares are going out the window because no one gives kind of digital gifts as much, because they're, it's just a problem there we haven't quite solved. I mean, you've got an iTunes gift card, but that's about it. And this allows, the physical to get a comeback in Q4 of every year, which for a lot of these industries is their biggest quarter, So you also have this issue where, it's an aside, I suppose, but in terms of the growth of these services, until you get replacements for those kinds of things, then the fourth quarter, which is the biggest quarter for most of the labels in the world, is always going to be physical, and those things will all hinder this slightly. Another point that I think I haven't really seen come up too much is that, like you, Eliot, I'm a big fan of Rdio. I use it more than Spotify at the moment, and I loved that notion when I created the account of it just scanning my iTunes library and almost recreating my iTunes collection within Rdio. I thought that was really good, but one area that I'm still not seeing, which I think would also be a big driver in winning people over, is trying to get people to convert from physical. Because like I've done this lately, where I've just had a massive kind of life laundry of my CDs and just gotten rid of all of the stuff I bought that was just played once and never again, things like that. But it kind of occurred to me while I was doing that, it would be really handy if there was just a way to kind of scan a barcode and suck it straight into Spotify or Rdio or anything else. And those kinds of things, if you target people with things like that, it feels like the agenda at the moment has always been people leaving iTunes to go to Spotify. And nobody seems to raise the question of leaving your CD collection to go to Spotify or Audio and things like that. And I find that quite strange, because I think that's, if someone nailed that as like a product pitch, you know, Spotify built in a barcode scanner and marketed aggressively saying you can pull the whole lot over by scanning your barcodes and matching and all this kind of stuff, I think that would be quite compelling, in my opinion.
I've
Maybe
got
I'm
to jump
wrong
in
about
here. You know, they might do it, because I mentioned this after the Spotify announcement. There were people milling around. Some interesting characters. Michael Robertson was there for some reason. I don't know. We can talk about that later. I got the impression he might have been consulting for Spotify somehow.
Really?
But anyway, we're milling around there, and I mentioned that this Moggles feature, which nobody uses but was really fun to write about. So Mog has a thing where you can take your camera and scan just take a picture of the album cover, and it queries, I think it queries Amazon's album cover database, and you do add it to your Mog collection just by taking a picture of, a record or a CD. And I mentioned that to some of the Spotify people. I'm like, you'd be in a pretty good position to do this. So, it's not barcodes. They could do it with barcodes, but I think it could be a great ad campaign. People going into record stores, taking pictures, picking up albums from like the staff picks section, and take a picture of it, put it in their Spotify, and say like, and really make the point that they're not even stealing it, because they're paying $120 a year, which is more than most people pay for CDs anyway. So they perfectly, they have the right to just treat the world like a big showroom. For Spotify. I mean, I feel bad for record store owners in putting this idea out there, but it's not like that would be the thing that causes them trouble, right? If they've got enough going on.
Let me add one more thing, both to both of your points. I mean, we four are attuned. We're unique. We're early adopters. We're in the tech world. We're in the music world. So we're tinkering with all this stuff, and we're trying Mog and RDO and Spotify and so forth. But I think that when to your question, when you talk about when this is going to go mainstream, you have to think about the habits of mainstream music fans or mainstream music consumers. And I think one reason that we haven't quite made the jump to a streaming service becoming mainstream is because of it takes a long time to adopt a new format. I mean, it took however many decades to go from LP to CD, and that was a real struggle, as we all know, to make that transition. And then, even though it seemed like for a while it was the Wild West with MP3s and downloads, Apple basically took the whole thing over in 2003. And so now they own the entire, except for maybe Amazon, they own the entire paid download market, more or less. And it took people a long time to make that leap. Even though it was great and it was convenient, we all had iPods and iPhones, it still takes people to go, well, I've spent all this time building my CD collection, and I want to pay again, da-da-da-da. And now it's like, okay, so now less than 10 years later, as a regular old music fan, you're being asked to jump into this crazy non-ownership world where these, you have a Spotify and an RDO and a Mog, and they're changing constantly. And how does it work with Facebook? And what do I pay? And does it work on my device? Does it work in my car? Does it work in my stereo system? This is a difficult thing, so you're not only asking consumers to change their behavior just from going from one format to another, as they did from LP to CD to iTunes, but to change their whole way of thinking about music. And that takes time. And I think that, eventually, probably, in experts that I've talked to, and I think we can all agree that probably the streaming space over the next few years will wind up being taken over by one major player or a couple major players. Like Google will be the streaming thing, or Apple, or whatever. When that starts to happen, then I think people start to go, okay, I did have CDs, and then I had iTunes, and now I have Google, or whatever it is. And I think it becomes easier at that point. But now I think we're still very much in that sort of 1998-ish, do I use the diamond reel player? What? It's obviously bigger than that and less painful, but it's still kind of that, what do I do? How do I do this kind of world? And it needs to make a jump from there, I think.
Yeah, and
well, it is interesting, just to jump in, that a few blocks from where I'm sitting right now, Spotify is in the Google building here, here in Manhattan already. So it wouldn't take much for what you're talking about to happen on that front. But just to talk about the holiday thing briefly, that's when you see a huge bulge in iTunes sales as well, and that's been my theory for years that I'd say half at least of the music bought on iTunes is not bought by the person who paid for it, if that makes sense. I think it's like parents saying, okay, here's an iPod and I'm going to raise a responsible citizen and here's your $20 gift card and now we're all happy. And if I worked at Spotify, I would be working on how to replicate that. So if you're the person giving the gift, say to your parents, maybe this time it'll go the other way around, right? Where it's the kids giving Spotify accounts or RDO or whatever to their parents, offer a way to pre-populate that account. My dad is a classical pianist, but he loves Buffalo Springfield. So I could easily go through and put every Buffalo Springfield album in there, maybe some classical stuff, although I'm not as up on it and never will be as he is. But something where you at least get it started and then offer it as a gift. I mean, Spotify has gift cards that are for sale in retail outlets, but it's like then you're sitting there going, what do I do? I'm scared. Where did I put my CDs? Forget about this, Yeah. So I think that would be a cool gift, and maybe even they could offer a discount because you're adding another subscriber to their service and you're doing a bunch of work of what do they call it? Onboarding them or something. That'd be an interesting model. If I were at Spotify, I'd be doing that in holiday season 2013. Yeah,
absolutely. And let me just throw something out there, Darren. Yeah. One thing that I saw was missing from the announcement, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but they talked a lot about how they're improving the existing product. They're adding features to make the experience better, to improve retention, to improve the monetization of the platform, people converting from free to paid. But I didn't see any element of of some key partnerships or key external factors that would allow this mainstreamization that we were talking about earlier, in terms of telecom partnerships or any other type of big media partnership that would help them gain or reach that mainstream audience. So do you think that was something that was missing for a reason? Do you think you're finding it hard to get that sort of deals in place?
Well, I mean, it was certainly interesting yesterday at the Music Ally thing because Francis Keeling, who's is he the head of digital biz dev, I think, for Universal, he was there and he made it very clear that he is not a fan of bundling Spotify with your mobile phone deal or with your TV or cable or anything like that. And I thought that was quite interesting to have a guy who's clearly leading on a lot of these deals, making it, he was quite blunt about the facts. I think even it was the first swearing of the night when he described it as total bullshit, like he just wouldn't do it. So I think within that, it felt like the writing was on the wall. If the biggest player in the game at the moment is clearly not a fan of embracing these models, that would shut it down dead right there. But I'm sure Spotify might continue to try. I don't know. Yeah,
I think Francis also was talking about how he thought it was bullshit especially when people say that ISPs and stuff like that should foot the bill for certain services or incorporate it in their fee structures. I mean, I'm not sure he would be so against maybe a big player offering that as an add-on. It's more. I think it was more like an idea of I think it's bullshit that people would think that British Telecom would have to incorporate that because they're stealing our music through the internet. But
well, I mean, time will tell. I don't know. What do you guys think?
To me, last year I was a fan of this strategy because somebody's got to pay for this, right? And a device manufacturer has money, and there's already this precedent of services subsidizing hardware, so it's not too hard to envision it, from a business perspective. But from a user perspective, I feel like we're already too tied down, even by picking Spotify or RDO or MOG or anything. So to add another layer of now I'm switching from HTC to a Samsung handset, or I'm switching from AT&T to Verizon, and adding more layers of tied downness doesn't seem like the right move from a consumer experience. You already feel locked down, and then it's like, oh, you can't switch Spotify and you can't switch Verizon, or all the music you've collected for your entire life goes away. Like, no, I'm not paying $120 a year for that, Or, I guess I'd pay less, but I wouldn't use it.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that actual model, with the specifics of that company or that person that you mentioned, Darren. But I agree with Eliot. That feels like sort of a 2009 model. Like it was, remember the Nokia stuff that was going on. It seems like people were, we accept Apple as sort of the walled garden, and maybe we accept Google as kind of an alternative Droid walled garden. I don't know if we want to have a whole bunch of different walled gardens, so everybody's going, oh, what can I use with this? What can I use? And there's one quick point to the last conversation that I think we didn't mention is the elephant in the room in all of this is sort of YouTube. My daughter's 10, and she gets all of her. She consumes. It's amazing to watch. She's a huge music fan, and she also is like I was at her age in the sense that she picks people to be fans of. She loves Taylor Swift, she loves the Beatles, and she has posters of them all over her room. She's a fan, just like any of us were. So she consumes music the same way in that sense. She gets it all from YouTube, and YouTube has stuff on there that you can't get on Spotify. Like, have you tried to search for Beatles songs on YouTube lately? A lot of them are on there, and they're not on Spotify, as we know, or on most of the other services either. So before, I feel like YouTube is a little bit of a hump that some of these other streaming services have to get over, even though it's very inconvenient in many ways.
It's you really said it there. I did a story called "Is YouTube Bad for Music?" where I tried to address this, and then you can bet I got on the phone pretty quick after that with some people from Google, trying to explain, why they're good for music. But you're absolutely right. The kids, YouTube is their music service, and I think one way they're able to pull that off is. Well, there are a few ways. First of all, it's video, so you can make so much more on a video pre-roll than some text ad that displays while you're not looking at Pandora. They can do stuff. They can, the pre-rolls, the overlays, and then the display ads, and then they happen to be Google, which has this massive ad network behind it, so it's not that hard for them to integrate all that stuff. And then there's the fact that they're Google and they have all the money in the world, 96% of which comes from simple web searches, but still it's there. And then there's, I think there's a lot of pressure that artists don't feel with something like Spotify to, where it's like you don't exist if you're not on YouTube. I think there's a lot of pressure for them. The audience is simply so big, you could end up with 100 million views. It's an interesting thing, but Steve's absolutely right. It's the elephant in the room. It's the biggest free music service in the world. One of the heads of one of these actual music subscription services put it to me best. He said this to me a few years ago and kind of opened my eyes to it. He's like, you want to see the best on-demand music service in the world, go to YouTube and close your eyes. Just pretend it's not video, and it beats everything. So. What motivation does Google have to enter the music subscription race when it's already winning in this other weird way, especially with younger music fans? And it has an API, so people are building apps on top of YouTube instead of on top of Spotify or RDO. It's a sticky wicket, as I guess one of the four of us might say.
And one other quick thing. Sorry about YouTube. I know we're digressing here from Spotify, but YouTube is also a pretty effective monetizer, to use the clunky word. If you're especially for music publishers, but for a lot of different entities in the music business. If the classic example is that goofy wedding dance that was set to the Chris Brown song, where the people came out at their wedding and danced up and down the aisles, and Chris Brown could have said, "Take that down immediately." He had the right to do that under the DMCA. But instead, he said, well, how about we'll put a bunch of ads up there? Or YouTube said, why don't you put a bunch of ads up there? And suddenly, it's not as big as CDs were, of course, but it's starting to become a pretty significant revenue stream for both labels, artists, and all kinds of content holders. And it kind of makes you think, well, so Spotify's paying 0.0000001 cents per stream, even though it's getting more significant. The YouTube thing makes a little bit more sense, and maybe people are going in more that direction.
I think for me, the other thing that, I mean, we're truly skewing off the Spotify track now. I mean, obviously, I work with bands and, market bands. That's what my company does. And within that, it's just an interesting observation that from my side, YouTube offers a lot of things for us in the sense that, particularly with tools like remarketing and retargeting, so that, if I stick an artist's premiere, new track from the new album on YouTube, then everyone that watches it, I can kind of capture those people and target them again with, when the album's out or any of these kinds of things. And those kind of options and those tool sets that are available make it, if you were to consider it as a music service, it's also one of the most empowering for marketing people like myself, because I can round up all the people that have watched my artist's video or his channel or any of that kind of stuff, and then target those people with ads later on. And that's a very, very good and cost-effective way of reaching those people to simply communicate a message. I mean, I think we're all, understanding of the fact that banner ads don't get masses of clicks and all these kinds of things, but that's not really the point. It's just good classic marketing in that sense that you want to give a sense of buzz around your album release or whatever else. You want to make this available, make people aware that it's available and all that kind of thing. And this is a very cost-effective way of doing it. And it's just an observation, really, that from my side, you can't easily do that kind of stuff on Spotify, for example, or indeed any other music services. They don't actually empower back to the artist or the people representing the artist, I guess in my case, to undertake those kinds of things. So it's interesting where YouTube is positioned in that sense of what it brings, and as you said, Steve, with the API and things like that, it does sit in quite a different space, and that's, in many respects, is actually a pretty cool space.
Yeah, and that kind of brings in another point on the Spotify announcement, which was the Discovery tab part of things. So it's a discover new feature that Spotify have announced, which for some writers have taken as a move away from direct social interaction on Spotify, because the feature is to be able to follow people that are mostly tastemakers, artists, and people that can curate a collection that you might be interested in following. And that's been seen both as a move towards a better experience, because of course you're not necessarily going to be interested in the music that your friends are playing, because music is a very individual thing, but it also marks a move away from a directly social experience on Facebook if who you end up following is not somebody that you actually know. So what's your take on this? It's both more social and not more social. In those two weird senses, as I think it was Jay Herskowitz from Tomahawk put it in a tweet. So what do you guys reckon about this? Starting with Steve, I don't know if you have a point of view on that.
Yeah, I do. I just sort of a personal view as a user. I love the Spotify syncing with Facebook feature, and I'm just completely fascinated by it. And I'm not to be trusted either, because some people might perhaps think that, oh, he's a music critic, he writes for Rolling Stone, therefore he might be one of these tastemaker type guys. But the other day I had to do a story on Kenny Rogers' Christmas tour. And I spent all day listening to Kenny Rogers gospel songs, to the point where people were actually on my Facebook page were like, "Uncle, no more Kenny Rogers gospel songs," and I feel that way too. So that occurred to me. I thought that it was very interesting that Spotify recognized that officially and picked up on it. I don't trust any of my friends on Facebook, with a few exceptions. Certainly if I'm friends with Robert Christgau or something, which I'm not, but something like that. I mean, that's one thing. But yeah, I trust certain entities over the years. I trust Spin Magazine or whatever for indie rock, or certain hip hop publications for hip hop. That's the stuff I trust. Or certain DJs over time. There are tastemakers, and I don't really trust my friends. Sorry, guys. So I think that this shift that Spotify has picked up on is absolutely appropriate, and I'll be fascinated to see if it works. This is the time of year, as maybe you guys are doing as well, being music writers, where you start to sort of catch up on 2012 music, what you've missed, make your top 10 lists and so forth. And the way I'm doing it is I'm picking up playlists of people who I trust, who have taken the trouble to make playlists. I get in the car and I have a sync system with my Ford car, and I plug in Spotify, I set it to random play, and I'm like, oh, I missed that one. So that's the way I'm listening to music right now on Spotify.
Yeah, sure.
Wow. I think I agree, that there's not as much utility other than just the shock and horror value of seeing what your friends are listening to. I think there are people that you like, whose music taste you like, and who you wouldn't want to see their baby pictures. I mean, it's kind of apples and oranges. I don't think it's as weird as news stories. I think that really it has just blown up in everybody's face over the past year. You can listen to music while you're working, but if you're telling everybody on Facebook, like, hey, I just read a story about Kim Kardashian, at 2:30 in the afternoon, that's not as compelling. And I just think news doesn't work in this spot, and music does. But I love the idea of following artists. I mean, I had this, if you search evolver.fm for the word gold mine, I had this idea, which, it's great to have ideas when you're a writer and you don't have to actually risk anything. And you just say, oh, somebody would make millions off of this if they had the guts. But me, I'm too busy. I've got to write this article right now. But the idea of scrobbling when an artist plays, I think that is worth money. If you love whatever Carly Rae Jepsen, what is she listening to? Would you pay $20 a month for that? Would you pay $50 a month? Some people would. To listen to everything she heard, you're hearing it the next day. And that's kind of what this new discovered thing in Spotify is doing. I mean, I think you have to get a little bit more intentional with what you're sharing. We don't know yet because they haven't launched it yet. But I think it's when somebody makes a playlist that you're following, you see that. I don't know if they're going to enable full stalker, like Scrabble stalker mode or whatever. But I think it's a fascinating thing. I think it does make a lot more sense from a practical perspective to follow people who you are interested in for musical reasons and not because you went to college together or something. I mean, it's an untapped area, and it'll be interesting to see what happens once they tap it, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, for me, it was always, I think it was it Trent Reznor kind of nailed it when they launched the social element to Spotify, and he just came out with this great quote that basically just said, I don't really care what my friends are playing because none of their taste in music is as good as mine. And to be honest, it was like I related greatly to that. So when I've turned mine off. I've long since. I mean, to be honest, I now use audio more anyway. So I'm not as bothered. But it was kind of interesting, though. I think it's even when you peel back to stuff like Jaron Lanier's book, You Are Not a Gadget, and in that he kind of has quite a lot to say about how bad the interpretation of social is, and how someone genuinely believes at the moment they've sort of successfully brewed down the entire ways in which we interact and those numerous levels and depths in which we connect with the different people in our vast spider's web of social mix. It just doesn't work like that. It's like, you are my friend, ergo I would care what you listen to, because particularly, I think, as you get older, that couldn't be further from the truth. So, yeah, I'm with you guys that, I think bringing in things that allows a more qualitative element to this is great. And I think you're seeing a rise of more of that stuff anyway, whether it's, the sort of songs are type stuff where the sales pitch is very much, this is a human curated playlist by an expert, not just some algorithm, and those sorts of things. I think, yeah, it's going off track from this a little, but I think it's certainly in the future. I think there is arguably room for much more of that kind of qualified filtration as opposed to we built an algorithm type stuff, which is where we've been.
Sorry to interrupt, Darren. I wonder also if the Facebook Spotify thing, which I'm still really intrigued by and don't think it should be dumped, is maybe could be presented differently. Like I've always thought of what my friends are listening to or what strangers on the street are listening to as more of a fashion thing than a discovery thing. Like I had, Eliot, you mentioned $1 Million Ideas. Mine a couple of years ago was let's make clothing that display like mood shirts, but they display what you're currently listening to on your iPod. It'll say song and artist, and you're running around, and all of a sudden people can see, oh, I'm listening to that, and that's like a fashion statement. That's like carrying the big boom box, around. in the 80s or whatever, and I feel like there's got to be some way that the Facebook Spotify connection can harness that. I do feel like it's useful, maybe to name one example, like you see a member of the opposite sex that you're trying to approach, and you see that this person played your favorite song or some obscure song. That's a way that you can connect through social media on Facebook. And that's the way that this kind of that the Facebook Spotify thing can be incredibly smooth and easy and useful. As far as it being a discovery tool, which seems to be what Spotify is after on this, it doesn't seem to work that way. And I just wonder if maybe there's just a different set of thinking, a different type of rules that need to apply here somehow.
I think it's interesting, actually, you mention that, though, because it's funny when you think of it that certainly on Facebook, you don't, there is no visual interpretation of data on there. There's just like a slew of...
Right, it's screening by.
Everything going on. Whereas it was interesting, like, Last FM, like I remember when MCA died, for the MCA from the Beastie Boys, Last FM posted up graphs that kind of showed just how hard it spiked in plays of Beastie Boys tracks around that time and all this kind of thing. And it's just funny now you mention that, thinking like, I would be quite interested in seeing those kind of graphs of like trending songs and, I'd be interested as obviously a marketing guy, it's good to know, but just among your friends to see what's emerging and presenting that data differently. They really don't do it at the moment. It is just a kind of ever hemorrhaging torrent of stuff, which doesn't carry great value.
Go ahead, sorry. I keep interrupting. Sorry.
Oh, no, I'm done.
Sorry. Am I interrupting? Who's the one?
Go ahead.
I think it's me. But I guess I'm doing it then. If you go to, I thought I was going to be talking to Facebook today, but apparently they've scheduled a call with me for next week. Who does that? Like when? Next Wednesday? Are you kidding me? But they are sharing this thing, facebookstories.com/2011. And it's kind of what we're talking about. It's the beginnings of some type of graphical representation. In this case, it's all Facebook users. So you've got, which songs were shared the most throughout all of Facebook. And it's interesting, but it's not as interesting as it would be if it was just my friends, and then I could mouse over each wedge in the pie and see which of my friends listened to those songs. So at least on a general level, their PR department is thinking about this on a global Facebook level, and maybe it'll. Who knows? The charts look pretty if you take a look. I mean, maybe I think I wouldn't be surprised if they start doing it. I mean, it's going to be tricky with Facebook a little bit because they don't want to imperil their magical status as this place that gets to know everything about us. It's kind of a line where at a certain point you might be like, wait, why am I doing this? Like, sorry to the marketing contingent here, but it's like, why am I just serving myself up like this? And if you really start to see graphs that break down your own behavior and your friends' behavior and all this stuff that's really being tracked, I mean, I think they could take it too far where it freaks people out a little bit, like, oh, we can tell that like right when you became friends with this guy, that's when you got into that band, which happens to be his favorite band, or I mean, it goes on and on, the type of data slicing that they could do. I don't think they've taken it far enough, but I think it's possible they could take it too far.
I have to say, actually, just as an aside to that, from working with some bands who've done pretty well this year, it's been very interesting to see an emerging trend on Facebook of kids liking your band and then immediately unsubscribing from seeing any updates by them. So it's become the new, I like whoever, and it's this weird thing that I've seen kind of increasing. As the band's popularity increases, so does the instances of people, usually young people, clicking like so that it says, Darren likes whatever group, but then immediately opting to not see any of the updates. So they're kind of crafting a persona on Facebook to impress other people, but it's not real.
It's the new buying the T-shirt and not the record.
Yeah, exactly. So just thought I'd throw that in there.
That's great. Yeah. I want to add one more thing to this discussion, and I know I'm being single-minded about this, but I find it interesting how people use YouTube links to music on Facebook compared to the way they use Spotify. Like, I think that the way people use YouTube links on Facebook is more of an effective discovery thing. Like, I click on links all the time, and maybe it's just because the type of stuff that's available on YouTube is more compelling for that format. Like, oh, Bruce Springsteen played a show last night, and he did this song, you know, and I can see it right now, and I can look at it in my Facebook feed, and boom, there it is. I don't have to search on it for the web. So that's, you know, that is discovery. That's something like, no matter who posts the Bruce Springsteen live clip of the E Street Shuffle the previous night, I'm going to click on that because I'm a Springsteen fan, you know. Whereas Spotify, you know, if I'm just seeing, like Darren said, you know, blah, 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 this person likes this person likes this person likes, you know, I'll just figure out my own music later on Spotify. It's just a little bit different thing. And I wonder if the way people use YouTube through Facebook is something that Spotify could take more of an advantage of. I mean, it's inelegant. It's like just sharing those old-fashioned URLs that we've always shared since the beginning of the internet through email or whatever. But it still seems to work. It's like a classic way of doing things.
I mean, certainly from my side, when I'm marketing, you know, an artist, Spotify, you can do good promotion with Spotify, but everyone is very cognizant of the fact that you are within very much of a walled garden. So it's a different world. It's like you have the internet and then you have Spotify over there. And while their counter to that would be, well, we've got a web client, but the problem is, as long as you have to sign up and have an account and you can't just click play, then it will not beat YouTube. And same with SoundCloud as well. And I think that is the reason that the portability of SoundCloud and YouTube are the reasons that they are inevitably the first place you see music by an artist at the moment. They go to those, and it's entirely because if my artist posts a SoundCloud link or a YouTube link, all the fans can then share that into the newsfeed. And behaviorally on Facebook, people do not like to leave Facebook. They want to sit there, they're killing time, they want to see what their friends are doing, they want to consume the media right there. They do not want to click it, launch a client, all of this stuff in the background. It's not how they behave. So that's totally right. You know, it is entirely what has defined YouTube as a, you know, for a marketing perspective as the place to position things. And obviously, as long as there's the question of SoundCloud and payments around streams and everything else, you're seeing YouTube becoming, I would argue, more of the go-to service for this, because people can monetize it as well as it being very portable, shareable. And as you touched on before, Steve, that element of kind of, you know, you should be on YouTube. You know, to not be on YouTube is a big sin. So yeah, just throwing that in there.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think it's true on both sides of the equation. I mean, when you're sharing something, everywhere you look on the entire internet, there's a little, you know, Facebook button and a little Twitter button. And I think they're becoming invisible, you know, the way that a lot of ad formats are invisible, where it's just blah, 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 blah. I don't know what that does. Or maybe it shares the song, maybe it makes them link, maybe it embeds within Facebook. I don't know. I don't care. I barely see it anyway. But then you paste in a URL for the first time of a video from YouTube into Facebook, and you're like, oh my God, it's right here. Like this, and it's communicated. Whoa, sorry. It's communicated to the person who's doing the sharing, you know, what it's going to look like on the other end. And once you learn that behavior, you're on board with it. Whereas there's this share to, you know, when you're sharing to Facebook from within Spotify or something else, you have no idea what's going to happen, really.
Absolutely.
And then you make your decision, and you're like, well, I'm not doing that, and then it becomes ingrained, and there we are, you know. Yeah. So I think there's a lot of value.
Yeah. Copying and pasting URLs, man. That's like the classic way that we share things on the internet, and have since 1990 whatever, you know. It's like driving a 57 Chevy, you know. Absolutely. It's maybe not the fastest and sleekest way to get around, but everybody uses it on Twitter and Facebook and everything else, and it's very difficult for some newfangled Spotify Facebook connection or whatever it is to overcome that.
And
it reminds me of the Alexis Madrigal article in The Atlantic that was so great about the dark social net, or I forget what its term was, but he's like, every month I see this, my biggest source of traffic is like unknown, or, you know, just happened to show up, and that's what it is people copying and pasting links to each other. Yeah. So we're not always within this bespoke walled garden thing even now, and it's kind of interesting that the majority of it is outside of all of that whole system. That's neat.
And so I wanted to move out of the talking about the perception from the public and from the people that are using Spotify to turning it around and talking about the perception of bands that are using Spotify. So one of the big things that Spotify managed to do at the announcement was to get Lars Ulrich to get on stage and actually promote the service, announce the fact that the band Metallica was going to be on Spotify. Why? Because they've acquired the rights to their own masters finally, and this way they're going to make quite a lot of money out of Spotify. They don't have to share those revenues with anybody anymore. So that was kind of a very interesting announcement, just because there's been so many stories in the last 5-6 months about almost daily artists and labels coming out with the checks that have been paid by Spotify for X million plays have been super low. And so as much as most music is on Spotify, there are still a fair few holdouts on that front. So Spotify really has to work to try and remove those holdouts to make sure that management companies are aware of the power of Spotify and releasing that. And it was interesting actually last night to hear, again, we're talking about Francis Keeling from Universal, talking about the fact that he does not believe in windowing at all. So that's another sort of reminder that any windowing that happens within even the Universal umbrella is probably management mandated rather than label mandated. So Spotify's got a lot of work to do to convince those guys that have the power to say, no, we don't want my release to go on Spotify, to actually make sure that they do want the release to go on Spotify. So Steve, I wanted to start with you just because you wrote about the whole Napster thing in quite a lot of detail in Appetite for Self-Destruction, and you also talked about the Metallica lawsuit as well. So what's your perception of this shift from Lars and from Metallica? Is it just driven by the money, by the fact that they can now actually project making a fair chunk of money from being on Spotify, or is there a deeper reason behind that?
I was trying to do a story on this week. The Metallica camp didn't want to talk about it, beyond what they'd already said in the press conference. But I did wind up talking to their attorney, who made it clear that he was not speaking on behalf of the band. So that's why we wound up not doing a story. But he did say that the distinction between Metallica putting the music on Spotify versus their issues with Napster, so in the hallowed age, was that they have control now. They made a deal with Spotify, so they're allowing this to go on Spotify, just like with iTunes or whatever else. So whereas before it was just people outside their control who were sharing their music illegally, basically. Yeah. So that's really the distinction. I mean, it's pretty obvious. It's not too surprising that they would say that. But I'm sure there is a money element too. There was like a nothing to lose element. It's pretty fascinating that Metallica actually owns all of its own music, which I actually didn't realize until catching up with the stuff that you prepared. That puts I assume that over time Metallica was so powerful with its record label, Warner, and had so much leverage that they were able to renegotiate and get that kind of control. That's so rare. Yeah. And when a band has control of its entire, it's that popular and has control of its entire classic catalog, they're willing to do all kinds of things with it. They're willing to say, well, if we monetize it this way, that's money that's coming in, and it's better than no money coming in. Yeah. So I'm sure that those things were all factors in why they made the decision to go with Spotify. In the case of Metallica, it's possible that, and I'm just popping off here, but it's possible that other than a few classic albums, they're not making a lot of money the usual way these days off of their iTunes catalog or whatever else. So maybe they're at the point in their career where discovery is very important. And as we've seen, Spotify, and Metallica doesn't seem to do too many. I've done some research on YouTube lately, and they don't seem to do too many takedown notices on YouTube. If you plug in, I'm digressing, but if you plug in Metallica and full concert into YouTube, you get this incredible list of stuff, like 2.5-hour full shows, dozens of them from all over the place. And my sense is, at least yet, Metallica doesn't demand that stuff be pulled down, and there are ads on that stuff. So I don't know what's going on there for sure. I don't claim to. But, this is a way that the band can make a little bit of money, and more importantly, enable a lot of discovery. They have a lot of concert tours to sell in the future.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I liked how Daniel Ek skipped over the question at the Spotify event where somebody said, did Metallica receive extra money for coming on Spotify compared to a normal band, and blah, blah, blah. And Daniel goes, what was the second question? That was pretty funny. So I took that as much confirmation as we're ever going to get that was the case. But then a source close to the situation after the event explained that one thing that could have been at play is that Spotify, or that Metallica doesn't have its own label anymore. So they're almost doing a direct deal with Spotify, which is not easy to do. If you're a little band, I guess they have their own, they own their rights. I'm right about this, right? They're basically their own label now, right? So the big thing with Spotify royalties that I spoke with Charles Caldis, the Merlin guy, who heads up all the biggest indie labels in the world, like Beggars and Matador and all them, Merge, and he said that the way that the royalties work, nobody knows what they're getting. Like, they're not getting their Spotify money for sometimes up to a year later, which is after the U.S. launch, even now. Or, I guess now it's just starting to count, like, when Spotify launched in the biggest music market in the world. And if you look at Spotify's growth over the last year, it's pretty huge. So the idea that basically all the things that everybody's complaining about, the numbers are half, at most half what they should be, which isn't quite the factor of 100 that people probably wish it were, with some of these obscenely low numbers floating around. But it is a factor, and it could be one reason that Metallica doesn't have to have a label sit on this money for a year, or 6 months to a year. They are the label, so that could be one reason that they're more comfortable with it. They don't have to worry about some label like doing something weird, whether it's with the royalties or holding on to them for too long, or I don't know. It's tricky to. I don't want to make accusations because you can never really know what the labels are doing internally with the Spotify money. But at the very least, there's a delay. Even if they're doing everything perfectly right, then there's a 6 to 12 month delay that I think is a factor.
And by the way, I want to make it clear that I don't have any inside information about whether Metallica owns all of its catalog and has the rights to it. I'm just going by this link that you set out, which says it does own all of its own music.
It was literally
that's pretty unprecedented and surprising to me. The idea that all of a sudden is the Black Album going to come out on Metallica's label next year as a reissue, as opposed to on Elektra or Warner? Yeah. I don't know the answer to that. That's something that still needs to be researched.
Literally, the announcement came about, I think it was 10 days after they got control of their masters back. It was super quick. Literally, like, as soon as they got control back.
I think it was closer than that. I mean, my memory of it was not even that. It was like 4 days prior to the Spotify announcement. They announced that they had left Warner's.
Oh, so they did say that. They did say they got all their masters back from.
Oh, yeah. No, they've got all their masters back.
Oh, okay.
The deal runs through Rhino. So they have blackened recordings, which is their own thing, but the actual administration of it and things like that, touching on, I think, your point, Eliot, about how they're supplied in and things like that, I think it's still managed by Rhino, according to the articles I saw. Also, just touching on your comment about their full videos on YouTube, something that people weren't as aware of, I think, is that Metallica actually, for years, have run quite a keen tape traders club, so they allow fans to come and record the shows. So they're not. I think the problem was that off the back of the Napster thing, everyone just concluded that they must be incredibly, restrictive, conservative control freaks, and I think that really wasn't the case. And certainly where it comes to stuff like live, they've been very open about allowing fans to tape things, which I mean, as a personal observation, I think is probably the right thing, because at the end of the day, having a recording of the gig is great, but there's no way that recording is going to match like a professionally recorded and mixed version. So you're not chowing into your live releases and DVDs market.
But
there,
just to clarify, I mean, a lot of the stuff that's up on YouTube, or the full concert stuff that I was describing, and you're right about that, I agree with you, but a lot of that stuff is sort of stripped from official DVDs. So it's not all just sort of shaky fan footage of a 2.5 hour concert from 1993 like we see often on YouTube. This is like official stuff that was released. And so I don't, there don't seem to be, this stuff doesn't seem to be taken down, at least yet, from the Metallica point of view, and I found that curious.
Yeah, well, I mean...
It might be because of their tradition with the tape trading community. It might be that same philosophy, which makes sense.
Yeah, and I mean, I think the problem for me with all of this was that it felt a bit like, it was the same deal when the Chili Peppers arrived on Spotify, and it all reminded me of when Radiohead did the In Rainbows thing, which is that, they occupy a space that isn't easy to replicate and by no means sets a standard. The fact that Metallica own all their own masters now and have now negotiated to do this is fantastic. I mean, I think it's a very shrewd move. And as you've said, Steve, the fact that they've managed to get those masters back is a masterstroke. Is very, very clever on their part. But that doesn't represent, the other 99% of acts out there who simply won't get that right to do this, nor would Spotify want to do that for them, because they don't want to negotiate with 50 million bands. They want to negotiate with 4 majors and whoever, Merlin, I guess. It's
but that's like why I was starting the conversation by talking about perception, because that's what Spotify needs now from an artist management label perspective, is to improve the perception of the service in terms of its royalty payouts, because as much as, as Eliot was pointing out, most of the royalties have not been paid out yet by the labels to the artists, especially as far as the US rollout is concerned. The perception is currently relatively negative. So, I mean, aside from the facts, there's a lot of misconceptions, a lot of negative perception. So seeing an artist like that comes on board, seeing the guys from Mumford & Sons saying that the streaming of the album has not damaged the sales of the album, like we all know, kind of counteracts other episodes where the Rihanna album doesn't come out on Spotify on the week of release. So that I think that it's not a question of whether it's actually beneficial or it's effective in any way or replicable. It's just a question of how people are gonna see this.
For me, it's interesting because I think it goes back to the classic marketing concept of signaling, where the notion that Beyonce does a massive deal with Pepsi. It's not that we genuinely believe that she drinks Pepsi. It's that, within marketing there is a concept of signaling, which is simply that, seeing that Beyonce is associated with this drink reflects well upon the drink, even when people are fully aware that she may not drink it. And it's a similar thing with this. So it's like having Metallica on Spotify just paints a better picture for everyone. For Spotify, it reflects incredibly well, and it battles that whole negative press. So I think there's a big element of that within this.
This was No,
go ahead, Eliot. Sorry.
Okay, well, I was going to say that I think you're onto something that on both sides there was no small degree of PR involved. I mean, to have Lars Ulrich hugging Sean Parker, it rehabilitates both of their images from the events of a decade ago. Whether people care, certainly journalists and writers, Steve and myself, that symbolism wasn't wasted on us, and it's now there in our subconscious. Whether the average person notices, I'm not so sure, but why Metallica? It's just a pretty amazing thing, especially considering Daniel Ek used to be the CEO of uTorrent, the biggest BitTorrent client around, and then Sean Parker's co-founder of Napster, and here's Lars hugging them. A pretty powerful moment.
Absolutely.
I wanted to make 2 quick points here. I mean, another thing that maybe we're not taking into account for Metallica is, much more so than in 99 or 2000 or whatever it was when Metallica sues Napster, it's much more established, the thinking that you give away recorded music for free in order to sell something more expensive later, that the idea that recorded music is a lost leader. I mean, not that it should be like that. I'm not trying to say piracy is a good thing, but it's certainly much more accepted now than it was back then. And Metallica is certainly going to be a lucrative concert band for years and years to come. So I think that maybe that might explain partly, I mean, Kid Rock recently allowed his stuff to go up on iTunes, and I did an interview with his manager, and he said, well, things are a lot different than when iTunes first started in 2003. Everybody's doing it this way now, and you're screwed if you don't. And whereas before it might have been a little bit of an advantage to be a holdout. So that might be going on too. And the other point I wanted to make was that, just back to the popularity of Spotify, one interesting thing that I keep waiting for with Spotify, or really any of these other services, RDO or MOG or whatever, is that we haven't seen a moment yet. It seems like the moment for YouTube was perhaps, there could have been any number, but maybe that Lazy Sunday video from Saturday Night Live. The moment for the entire internet, when it kind of went from being this little geeky tech thing to everybody uses the internet, perhaps might have been the Monica Lewinsky scandal, when we could all read the gory details. I feel like Spotify hasn't had a moment like that yet, and they're when it happens, it might elevate them to be higher than some of these other services. So I've been waiting for that. Maybe the Metallica thing is a moment. I doubt it, but it seems like they're trying for that.
Absolutely. Well, that's great. I think we're running up to an hour now, so I should probably draw all this to a close. Otherwise, nobody's going to download the episode if it's over an hour, I don't think. But it's been great. Thanks so much. Anything that you'd like to point us to in terms of articles you've written or things you want to share with us, Eliot?
Yeah, we've been putting together painstakingly this ridiculous, I think we're up to 20 pages with sometimes 100 albums per page. We're trying to grab all of the best of lists for 2012 and put them in a playable format using an embedded Tomahawk player. And we've made a lot of progress. I encourage our readers to buy 2 copies of anything they like and give one of them away. And I'm trying to do a lot of messaging with, if you really want to freak somebody out, and holiday season 2012, buy them an album, and we've put together a place where you can hear all of it. It's play buttons. It's a whole year of the best music from every publication with play buttons. It's absurd.
Great.
It's on the front of Evolver until the end of the year.
Perfect. And Steve?
Man, I should probably put in a plug for rollingstone.com.
Absolutely.
I've been doing a lot more writing for it lately, and it's a good site. It's one-stop shopping. We do a lot of music business stories and tech stories on there, in addition to the celebrity stuff that everybody's used to from Rolling Stone. So that was my corporate plug for the day.
Great. And Darren, I know you've been on recently, but anything your end?
Well, I suppose, obviously I do the daily digest, so as well as doing the marketing, I run a daily email newsletter that goes out to about 200 people in the music industry, which is about 300 now. It's kind of a little secret, which I'm now clearly blowing the lid off. So if you go to motiveunknown.com, you can sign up for that, and that rounds up articles from all over the place, including Eliot, Evolver FM. So it gives little round up, pull quote, and to send people over. But I'm also now starting a thing called, very innovatively, the weekly digest, which I'm starting now as a bit of a quiet thing, but you'll be able to sign up on that on motiveunknown.com soon. And the aim for that is just do 1 email a week with maybe 5 to 10 links to just really good long articles like you see in Rolling Stone and elsewhere of just without trying to get on my soapbox, because obviously time is against us, I think you see a lot of very, very, churn press at the moment where everyone's trying to get first over the line, and the Spotify news was a great example, and I want to try and draw attention to more of the kind of thought pieces that analyse this stuff, and, don't try and be first over the line, but maybe take a step back a few days later and post things that, as a guy that does marketing with bands, makes me think and inspires me and things like that. So if anyone's interested in that kind of thing, keep an eye on motiveunknown.com. I'm going to post up a link for that. It'd be free to get. It's just to spread a bit of love and try and pull attention to the best things on the internet.
Great. Well, that's awesome. Thanks so much for your time, guys, and I hope I'll see you soon on the show again. Have a wonderful...
Enjoy your party.
Have a good holiday. Have a great holidays as well, because I'm probably not going to speak to you after this. Have a great Christmas.
Okay, thanks, guys. Nice to meet you, Eliot. Nice to meet you, Darren.
Yep. Cheers.
That's great. Thank you.